Hello everyone, it's Pojo. Welcome to the last Eternal spoiler breakdown of the season. We have Argent Depths coming out today, June 24th. We are going to be streaming it live starting at 6 p.m. PST, possibly earlier if we can get off work early enough. But yeah, you'll definitely see me from 6 to probably around 11 or 12 on Twitch TV /LocalPojo. So you can find me there Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, as well as probably some of Saturday, probably a lot of Saturday. We're going to be playing a lot of Eternal in the next couple of days with any luck. But first things first, we're going to be talking about the spoilers that we missed, as well as some new announcements. One of the new announcements is that there is a new power card coming out called the Silex. The Elysian Silex combined with the other set, Xenon. Basically, it is a 5-color pairing of Silexes, which are depleted power that are depleted unless you already have double time or double primal. If you have both, you get to create and draw a treasure trove, and regardless of that, the card gains time and primal. So it's a depleted Crest type power where you are getting time and primal together, but if you manage to get one of both kinds, then later in the game it becomes undepleted, and even later in the game when you have all of the influence together, you also get a treasure trove as a bonus to draw new cards, meaning that even when you're flooding, Elysian Silex transforms into a treasure trove and only slows your tempo roll a little bit. These are obviously super powerful power. They are very, very good, and they do a lot of things for different types of decks. Whereas the Vows would be very supportive of aggro formats where you are getting basically a lot of power out of your deck very easily. This is something where running a decent amount of power and influence builders builds into a much better Silex, which then builds into a better chance of getting those treasure troves. The justification for it even justifies some of the more like unusual influence fixtures you might run, because like things like Evangels will actually be very supportive of giving you undepleted power with Silexes and giving you those treasure troves very early, even when you're playing just your basic power for a turn. Yeah, these are super good power. They're on par with Crests for overall power level. They might actually be even more powerful than Crests depending on the circumstances. They aren't going to be as strong in some aggro matchups, but the ability to replace themselves with treasure troves is just something that other powers just do not have, and this is a really, really solid option for a hybrid power card, as long as you aren't looking for basically 1-drops and immediate plays. They're super good, and they're going to build really well into all of these sort of weird dual influence cards that we have been seeing, including all of the heroes with 4 different types of influence going on. So yeah, this is very, very powerful stuff, and in addition, since there are power cards that are depleted that give you double influence, you can set up a Silex on turn 2 and get a very, very good aggressive 2-drop out, which, yeah, all super strong. All of the Silexes are, of course, cups. They can be seen. We have the Argent Silex here. Effectively, they're supposed to be chalices. I believe a Silex is like a Greek cup with the 2 handles, although these ones do not have handles. They are just a slightly more unusual interpretation of them. But yeah, you have the Skycrag Silex, the Argent Silex, the Elysian Silex, the Rakano Silex, and the last one is the, Xenon Silex. So yeah, we do have a different cycle of 5 than from previous sets. You'll notice this cycle does not match the standard cycle of set 1 and set 2, where you have Xenon and a number of other cycles happening like on that front. That's actually, yeah, you know, this is something about Eternal, is that it doesn't have a power wheel structure, so these types of things can come out in very different types of sets. They just have to sort of be in sets of 5. And yeah, this is really interesting. Silexes are really, really powerful, ridiculous power. So something to be paying attention to, because they are going to set up a lot of the rest of the format and should make it very interesting to play a lot of these really high influence cards that we've been seeing, as well as some like more hybridized cards and more dual color cards in decks that actually have very high influence requirements. It's a super powerful option, and we get to do a lot with it. So yeah, that's the Silexes. Next up, we're going to be talking about some of the cards that we missed, as well as some of the new cards that were spoiled today in addition to the Silences. For example, Mave Maveloft Huntress. Killer, Imbue, Summon, Plunder. As a 2/1, this card does everything. It's actually insanely powerful. It's similar to the Time card that has Deadly and Plunder and Ambush. Like, this is like a really, really solid killer option because basically you get to, even if you throw Maveloft Huntress away, you tend to kill a bigger target than Maveloft Huntress is going to be targeting. You can just run this out, throw it on like a 4/4, get a 6/5, trade that into a 6/6, and then your 4/4 will unstun, and you'll be able to do even more with that. On top of that, it has Plunder, which means that it converts power into treasure troves in the late game, and it fixes your early game while being a reasonable removal option in blue, provided you have the deep influence for it. This card's super strong. I actually think it's one of the more exciting primal cards that's been shown so far, and it really sort of fits a lot of Primal's like things that it wants to do. It's what Primal's best killer card so far that I've seen. I believe we missed Silver Crest Purifier last time around. This is a 3-cost 1/1 with Lifesteal. Surge, double Silver Crest Purifier's strength and health this turn. So obviously, unless you are getting a lot of power into this card, it's a pretty significant investment to get a lot of power out of it. But you can do some things with this. A pretty good example of what kind of stuff you can do here is, for example, attack into something after playing a Reap for a total of 5 influence, and just getting yourself 2/2, 4/4, 8/8, 16/16, 32/32, and just slamming with a 32/32 lifesteal on turn 4. So it's a card that's similar to something like Hero of the People, is pretty hard to build around and play, but if you put it in a deck, your opponent does have to address it as a 3-cost 1/1. That being said, it's got deep influence requirements. You can't slam it in any deck, so it's definitely more of a like tier 3 card. It's something that you might see in a very specific combo deck, but unlikely to see a lot of play in like anything other than a gauntlet format or limited format where you're really taking advantage of that ability. It's still really, really cool. Delay is a 5-cost, negate an enemy spell, put it into the enemy hand, play a Minotaur with strength and health equal to that spell's cost, or play a Minotaur with strength and health equal to your green influence. So green influence does mean Minotaurs. It's still an unusual creature type to be playing off of a fast spell, but you do get a negate option off of this as well. It unfortunately only delays the spell, and the Minotaur is maybe not all that worth it. I don't really think that delay is particularly strong. If this was an and on top of it, then maybe it could do something. I also think it's just kind of awkwardly positioned as a time card, since its primary goal is to generate green influence cards, although delaying like a Harsh Roll or something along those lines can be kind of interesting. This is your sort of answer to board clear in time at the moment. It's not a great answer, and there are actually some better ones in other colors, but it's potentially something where if you're seeing like a really Shenra Speaks or Harsh Roll heavy type of setup in Throne, this might be something that you could throw in to sort of counter that and give you an extra turn to beat an opponent down, basically with extra Minotaurs on top of it. It's kind of an interesting idea. I don't know that the execution on this one's too strong. Reshape Revenge. Transform a unit into a random unit that costs 1 more or 1 less if it's an enemy. With 6-time influence, you transform all units of all of your units or all enemy units instead. This one is actually super cool. This is really kind of on par with Unstable Form. It triggers twice. It has the transform ability that's really quite strong. It has a little bit more versatility because it can be used to transform enemy units, and it has late game presence if you have time influence, which allows you to turn a large amount of small tokens into a very large amount of enemy tokens or allied tokens. Synergizes super well with Mind Link and all of that kind of stuff. If you want to play like fun, stable Echo decks where you are playing with Northwind Herald, which recently got a buff, this is the kind of thing where you actually get rewarded for playing multiple spells into Northwind Herald, as opposed to being punished by not having like the unstable forms to actually transform that many units that have like these sort of cheap effects. So really, really strong with like Pyre Elementals and Northwind Heralds and all the things that are free if you can do certain particular things, but then come back up in cost after you've played them. This is really something that has a lot of potential for a fun, stable deck. It's a great legendary, and there's some really cool stuff to be building around with it. So super solid one. If you get it, then you can build a pretty fun deck with it, and that's kind of what you want to see out of a legendary, a really interesting build around. All right, we have Genetrix Eral. 2 cost 3/4. Players can't discard cards. Surge the next unit you play this turn costs +1/+1. Really aggressive 2-drop, provided you can play it on turn 2, which is very unlikely with that cost. The correct way to do it is depleted power for double influence, followed by an undepleted insignia or something along those lines. Even a Silex would work if there was a Combre Silex, but it doesn't actually function in this case. Genetrix Eral does give you a lot for its buck though, so even if you were playing it on like turn 2 or turn 3 or 4, the surge ability allows for you to get some extra benefits out of this by playing another big unit on top of this, making your sand warriors or any sort of like 1 or 2 drop that you're playing in addition to this card very strong. This is a serious Combre aggro card with pretty serious benefits, and the players can't discard cards ability can be used to affect a wide variety of different options. You can do all sorts of cool things with this, like mess up people with Wrath of Caiaphas and Overdraw. You can make it so they can't throw like actual discard card stuff at you. There's a lot of like weird plays that you can make with this that are potentially pretty viable. Also allows you to belay having to discard cards as a side effect of any particular thing that you want to do. For example, if you want to be the person who gets the Wrath of Caiaphas Overdraw or something hot nonsensey like that. This is really potentially very interesting. I can see a lot of different ways that this could be very valuable, and obviously it's an amazing stat line on a 2 cost 3/4. Clearly this card offers all of the power that you want, and the real puzzle of course is getting the influence to put it out, as well as getting the correct cards to play with it. It's definitely an A+ card in terms of overall power level. There's a lot of cool stuff that you can do with it, and it does a lot while also being extremely survivable on the board. So basically everything that you want out of Genetrix Eral. Okay, next up we have Curtain Call. This is a 2 cost revenge card that says give one of your units +2 strength and life steal this turn, and for time, your units can't be killed this turn. Since this is a fast spell, this is a 2 cost shadow answer to Harsh Roll, which is not something that you'll see very often. Allows Xenon decks to build out boards that are very scary while still keeping something in the pocket to deny wraths and other pretty scary effects. That's a really big bonus. Giving 2 of your units +2 strength and lifesteal a turn gives you better trades and also stabilizes you a lot better. Overall, this seems like an absurdly strong card, and it's pretty well on parity with a lot of the other like 2 cost cards we've seen with very high influence requirements. This is something that very much rewards Xenon Silexes and clearly adds a lot of power to any deck. From Anguish, 1 cost, kill a unit with 5 strength or more, it gets Voidbound. Notably pretty hard to get that off, but the transmute is triple fire and triple shadow for a 5/4 Burning Cruelty. There is a cycle of these cards, and just trying to get the spoiler so we can change the Burning Cruelty. This is, an interesting option since it's very slow, but it does allow you to kill something very large without a lot of issues, so potentially quite worth it on that front. Burning Cruelty, the transmute, is a 5/4 for 6. It says at the start of your turn, play the top card of your deck. If it's a unit, it gets charge and deadly. Pay 5 to give a unit +5 strength this turn. So can buff itself, plays the top card of your deck, which is kind of ridiculous. Charge and deadly on top of that without the ability to sacrifice anything is quite strong. This effectively provides you with a Great Kiln Titan effect at 6 in Stone Scar, which is a pretty wild time, and the charge deadly is an even better bonus on top of that. So yeah, that's a lot to provide on a 5/4 unit overall. The pay 5 ability is nothing special, but it does allow you to make flyers and other scary unblockable units really strong. So has a lot of potential in a green, red, purple deck. Clearly something that you want to play around with transmuting because you can get some pretty interesting benefits off of it, particularly if you can set things up so that it is actively being played a little bit more aggressively. I think it's like a very interesting card, and obviously belongs in a number of different decks that want to play very expensive stuff. The main thing you want, of course, is the top card of your deck to be pretty expensive and pretty high value. That's going to be something that's difficult to deck build around, but potentially very strong. And even if you're not getting that value, it's still something that's going to be quite worth it in terms of what you're looking for overall. From Below kills an enemy relic and transmutes at triple primal, triple shadow into a 4/8 plasma primordial. Notably, with all of these fast spells, you do not have to play the color that they transmute from. As long as you are willing to just play Burning Cruelty, you can in fact do that. It's not necessary that you play a time card here because you can just run the transmute and play only that transmute card. Always pretty notable, especially since these particular units are quite ridiculous and do a lot of different stuff. Plasma Primordial says that whenever the enemy player plays a spell, they discard each copy from their deck, which as far as effects go is relatively minimal, but at least allows you to sort of short out certain types of decks that are trying to run, like, say, Honor of Claws or Wisdom of the Elders. Kind of an interesting way to sort of give a control deck a little bit more to deal with. At the start of your turn, you play a 3/1 Plasma Globule with Killer, which is a pretty solid option provided the Plasma Primordial lives. Most likely it will eat something like a Feeding Time, it'll discard the rest of the copies of that removal card from the deck, and you'll be safe in knowing that that removal card will not come back and can play other stuff a little bit more safely. The stat line on this card is okay, but I think that this is probably not going to justify playing it only in Feln. You might want it in a 3-color deck with Time and Feln together, since that gives you a little bit more to play with. But overall, I don't think that the card is insanely powerful at 6. It's a nice stat line, but the abilities don't really sort of mesh with each other, and like it mostly is a matter of like whether or not your opponent can kill that. If it said hand or deck, it would be a different story, since Plasma Primordial would then occasionally force 2 removal spells out on the same turn for that 4/8 stat line. That kind of has a little bit more potential, I think, but overall this card doesn't seem super strong. Reconstruction. This one was in Spanish, so I'll do my best to read it, but I believe that it is a revenge card that says gain a life for each card or each unit that you have out. So for each unit you get 1 life, and then in addition you get +1 power for each fire influence that you have. I could be wrong about that. My Spanish is a little rusty, but that's pretty much right, I believe. So 4-time influence for 3. That is definitely a pretty interesting card, since it is one of the better ramp cards that we've seen. It's a bit more powerful and a bit more consistent, I would say, than a Kindle, provided you can get the influence together to get this kind of setup going. And since it has Vengeance, you can play it again for free and get a really extreme ramp off of it to play your very, very big stuff. I think this card has a lot of potential in Praxis ramp decks. It seems like one of the more interesting ramp options we've been given. These cards do not typically have a lot of value, but this is one of the more interesting attempts. The influence requirements obviously make it somewhat difficult to play, but this is something that would definitely go into an Invoke the Waystones type deck for me. I think it's a really interesting way to try and get access to very scary Praxis threats and play around with that whole format. Really doesn't play in any other colors. If you're playing even tricolors, it seems very unlikely to get you the kind of ramp that you're looking for, but if you're building a good Surge deck in Praxis, this is something that can really help you bring out those big baddies very, very early and do some pretty wild stuff with them. Lord Ragnar, quick draw. Summon if any of your units or relics have used their ultimate abilities, they get those effects again. It's a Centaur Warrior. It's a 7/5 for 6. 7/5 for 6, not a bad stat line overall. A little bit on the weak side in terms of like defense, but the offense and the general sort of like aggression that this card provides is really, really strong, and obviously makes it an amazing limited bomb. If any of your mutant units have used their ultimate abilities, they get those effects again. That's a neat effect. It's odd to see on a red card, I think, but it's certainly not unreasonable in any particular color. It's not something that I think belongs to a particular color, and it's a really cool effect that like definitely I'm excited to be seeing in certain decks now from here on out. Certainly something that you can play around with quite a bit. You could even do like a yellow, purple, red Merriest Mandrake deck with Lord Ragnar and have yourself a blast. It seems like a pretty interesting idea. Sandblast Mage, triple fire and time for a decay 3/2. Certainly reasonable stat line. Not necessarily as good as Genetrix Eral's 3/4, but still gives you the ability to trade pretty well with other stuff. The ultimate ability pays 4 to give Sandblast Mage +2/+2 for each spell with cost 5 or more in your void. Again, not an extremely good ultimate, but at least gives Sandblast Mage something to play with in the late game, and since the card has Summon Plunder, it still fixes for you and does a lot of work for you in terms of setting up that late game and setting up up for those big spells. Doesn't seem like a bad idea in a 5-spell cost or more deck, but it's also a lot to ask for relatively little benefit overall. A big decay unit is probably just going to die to removal, but you could potentially get some really good value out of this card depending on what it's working with, and it does at least trade pretty well with other stuff, as well as make bigger units smaller, which may end up being something that you really just want a 2-drop to do. Draco Shaman Circlet is a 5-cost 5/5 that gives you the ability... that's not the right thing to be moving. All right, a 5/5 that gives the wielder the wielder becomes a dragon, and when they attack, you create and play a random dragon. This is a super fun weapon. I'm not certain it's a super good weapon, but playing a random dragon is something that you get for free off of Draco Shaman Circlet the first turn that you are attacking with this, and if you put it on a Berserk unit, you get 2 dragons out of it, on top of it being a +5/+5 bonus. So seems like an immediate in for Skycrag Berserkers if you want some sort of really interesting late game finisher, and you expect board clears to be the least of your worries. Something that is pretty wild on a wide variety of different options. Basically, like, the one disadvantage of this is that since you have to attack, a lot of the dragons with charge do not get their charge effects immediately. The random dragons that you get can include stuff like Rhymescale Draconis and Spitflame Draconis, both of which would stun your opponent's stuff, and that's pretty decent effect. I think there's even a dragon that stuns 2 units. There's a couple of different options here in Throne that are going to be pretty interesting to hit off of Draco Shaman Circlet, and combined with the fact that this weapon provides flying, it's really, really solid on any sort of Berserker unit that manages to stick the board for any period of time. So yeah, I came into this review thinking that it wasn't that good, but I kind of missed that the card had flying, and that is actually something that provides the card with a lot of reach as far as 8-drops go. It's something that does actively kill your opponent pretty frequently, and when it doesn't kill your opponent, it gives you enough value to really sort of deal with the fact that you didn't kill your opponent that turn. Fortune Teller, your card's revenge into the top 5 cards of your deck instead of the top 10. Super fun to play with. Triple primal and a shadow, so similar to Genetrix Eral in terms of the difficulty of cost, but has that summon plunder ability, and the card's revenge ability is definitely really, really strong. The main issue here, of course, is that you have to trigger your own revenges for this to be effective, and your opponent is very likely to kill Fortune Teller before revenge cards, since they don't really want to see revenge cards in the top 5 cards of your deck. But this does make all of your revenge cards consistently reliable in a way that really sort of benefits the revenge mechanic overall. I think that it is not the strongest of this cycle, but it has a stat line that is pretty respectable for a Feln deck, and you can definitely do some interesting Feln revenge control stuff here. It kind of brings back that sort of Feln Bloodcaster feel from set 1, I think, in terms of having a really strong early drop unit that gives you a good amount of defense and then also allows you to, like, basically produce some more reliable card draw results and value results later on. That's something that's sort of filling the same slot. I think it's probably going to be pretty strong in Feln decks in particular. Svetja Lightbringer, well, it has to be a Feln deck, but something for Feln decks that actually does help Feln decks, I guess would be the appropriate thing to say. All right, I don't know, we covered Svetja Lightbringer. 5/5 Aegis, Surge, each unit you control, or each unit in your deck gets +1/+1. Summon the enemy player can't play units until the end of your next turn. Yeah, we missed this one in our last breakdown, so I added it to this list. It's pretty absurdly strong. So you've got the Navani effect basically off of a Surge. If you play a Banner or a Silex after this, then you immediately get an additional +2/+2 to every unit in your deck, effectively triggering a Navani attack twice on an Aegis 5/5 that also has the summon ability to prevent your opponent from playing units. That's a lot of different value, especially since the card has Aegis, which means that its potential ways to be countered out are going to be pretty limited. You can't drop an ambush unit or anything off of it, so like you aren't going to be able to throw anything in front of Svetja that isn't a spell, and since the card has Aegis, it defends against those spells pretty effectively. That's pretty reasonable as a general body, even though the card does not really benefit that well against other units. If you're going first, it has a lot of extra strength because you're more likely to be able to attack into your opponent's units and also play that Surge effect twice. So yeah, it's a card that really has to be addressed in a lot of different ways, and I think that's very important to note. I would say that the Surge effect is actually the least interesting thing about this card. The ability to buff up your entire deck is pretty useful, but it's also not something that necessarily provides provides most of the power of this card. That's coming from the stat line, the Aegis, and the ability to block your opponent's units and thus attack with those units, basically slowing down the game enough to make the units in your deck that are coming out a little bit tougher, a little bit more likely to be drawn. You're still not going to see them for a couple of draws, so Svecha doesn't provide a way to end the game at 6, but it does provide a way to prolong the game long enough that you'll find other ways to end the game off of Svecha's surge ability. So pretty good design all around, definitely makes it so that you're very likely to see the Navani cards, so really, really cool option there. I think that it's a very powerful card overall and really kind of feeds well into itself. Cabal Strongarm, the last of this cycle of 5 cards, unless I've missed one. Fire, Triple Shadow, Decay. When one of your units with 5 strength or more dies, play a 1/1 Vampire Bat with Flying and Lifesteal. As someone correctly pointed out in the YouTube comments, the 5 strength or more thing appears to be a Stone Scar specific option that you're going to see as a draft staple, as well as like a sort of theme of Stone Scar for this set. 5 strength or more matters here, and playing a 1/1 Vampire Bat with Flying Lifesteal, while not an extremely good effect, still is something that Sil provides all by herself, while also being a 5/1 with Decay that trades well with just about anything. This seems like a pretty interesting option. It's a pretty cool card overall, and like, yeah, the card's vulnerability to something like Vara's Favor is somewhat offset by the little tiny Vampire Bat that you get afterwards, which you can then buff up with other cards and mess around with a little bit. If you're relying on basically a unit that is a little bit harsh rule proof in an aggro type setup, or if you were basically just trying to create something that's a nice early threat and draws some of that removal away, this is a pretty good way to do it, since the Vampire Bat provides, I wouldn't say a serious threat, but a decent enough threat that you can actually play around with a little bit, and you want to be able to play around the Vampire Bat by buffing it up or doing something to make it a lot more aggressive, because that's going to be actually a big part of Sil's playstyle, since the card will die so frequently. Helios, the Skywander, flying 2/2, draw a card for each blue influence you have. I'm not a big fan of cards that are just like sort of a big reward of a kind of boring style. I like this better than like producing a unit for every influence that you have, and certainly it's kind of an interesting option, but I've never really liked this sort of like iffy unit that also provides you with a lot of card draw type setup. This is not a design that super appeals to me. It also doesn't seem like it's terribly powerful, since it does effectively become a brilliant idea at some point, and even stronger than that the more blue that you can build. This card is clearly a solid card draw option for blue. I just don't think it has a great gameplay pattern. It provides you with a little tiny 2/2 that's gonna die to a lot of stuff, and then it effectively is just a card draw spell in disguise. I'm skeptical on the design of this card, but it's certainly powerful enough. It's a great card draw option. Wasteland Broker. We missed this card previously, but this was Baryadan's card design for the design a card contest or design a card influence setup. We also did Siege Train earlier, and that was given ++s. So yeah, Wasteland Broker, 4 cost 4/5 summon. You may put a card from your market and 3 additional copies of it into the top 20 cards of your deck. I don't know if I've talked about this one, but I actually really like the design of this card. It's a super solid approach to neutral merchants, and I think that like the stat line on it, the way that it approaches markets, and what it's doing with the market are all unique enough and interesting enough in colorless that it should be very, very fun to play around with. I am always a little bit worried about market stuff because they can provide some pretty unpleasant gameplay patterns in general if the market becomes the most important part of the deck, but this is like one of the more interesting merchants that we've seen printed, and like one of the best designs, so congrats to Baryadan. This was a really good card. Very, very well done. I hope that when we get to ours, it'll be as good, because, yeah, that's a really, really cool option. All right, World Pyre. Once per turn, you may pay 4 to play a card from your hand with cost equal to or less than your total influence. This one's pretty simple. It provides you card disadvantage for the ability to ramp, provided you are generating a lot of influence of different types. There's a lot of things you can do with this. I mean, you can just reap and play any card that you want without really having to worry about the card's influence costs. You can play 5-color their cards much more easily, which is something that Colorless is doing a lot more often, really sort of supporting that 5-color format with World Shaper Staff and other things like that. This is something where, like, combined with World Shaper Staff and Reap, you can start playing very, very scary cards very, very quickly, including Last Light Judgment without decimating. So there's another approach to the Last Light Judgment deck here with World Pyre and stuff like that. There's also a lot of other, like, big, scary 12 and 15 drops that you can generate by using Reap and World Shaper Staff to throw these cards out, and it's a reasonable option in some like hybrid decks that are just capable of generating a lot of influence and really want to play their big 8 drops or 10 drops. It's just something crazy that you can throw out that allows you to play a cheap card or a big card for much cheaper. The disadvantage is that you have to set up a 4-cost relic, not have it get destroyed, and then, like, even if it's on 8, it's probably going to be kind of difficult to play out big cards from your hand in this sort of speed that you're looking for. Still, like, reducing the cost of cards has its own benefits. You can amplify cards that would otherwise have too high costs. You can play around with, like, cost reduction or cost increases. There's a lot of ways to play around with World Pyre. This is a really exciting option for building a lot of very weird decks, and I think it's going to be a very fun legendary to play with. The legendary design in this set is on point, and that's probably a good way to sort of end this out. So yeah, that is the last card actually in our list, but yeah, some really, really cool colorless stuff here, some really, really cool deep influence cycles. We have the new power coming out, and, like, again, the design of this set is amazing. This is actually going to be a really fun set to play. We're super excited about it, and we can't wait to be jamming just, like, way more streams than usual and playing a lot more and hopefully doing a lot more brews and videos as we go along. So my schedule for this week is pretty much going to be playing Eternal Wednesday to Saturday as much as we can, 6 p.m. to whenever PST, and then following up on Saturday with probably a big most of the day stream, followed by some other, like, activity on Sunday. I'm going to be good for the next 2 weeks, but we will be gone for some of the 4th of July, so you won't find me on, like, the Friday to Tuesday around that particular time. That's it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed these, and I hope you enjoy Argent Depths, which comes out again today, the 24th of June. So look for us playing it there, and hopefully you guys enjoy it as well. Have a lovely evening, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. Cheers.